padding and garbage masking. Okay, so a difference mat is kind of similar to what we learned with our alpha mat or our alpha pass or alpha channel in the last lesson. So what you do with a difference mat is a little bit different in the way the After Effects views the information. So I want to talk to you about this without all of this other stuff here complicating it. So let's go into our video clips folder and grab that explosion.avi and we'll create a new composition with it. And because it has the same frame rate and it's also 1280 by 720, we don't need to worry about the composition settings differing from this composition. So we can just simply grab that file, left-click and drag it down onto the Create a New Composition button, and it'll automatically open it for us here. Now I'm going to hit the 0 key on my number pad and we'll watch this piece of footage. So it's just taking a second to cache those frames for us. But you get the idea. This little car catches on fire, we get this big plume of smoke, and we have an explosion. So because we've got this piece of footage to work with, I want to be able to use it for our helicopter. Now this in scale is a lot bigger for the car than it will be for our helicopter. If we had it this big for our helicopter, it would take over our entire scene. But we really have a little bit of leniency with the scale that we're using, and I think that this image is actually going to work quite well. And we have a very nice thing that happens in this piece of footage that's very important to being able to use the difference mat technique. And that is that the first frame is considered a clean plate. So this is really just a still image that has this explosion happening on top of it. And we'll be able to use that to create the difference mat. So the way a difference mat works is it's going to look at whatever we say the constant is, or the clean plate. And then any pixels that move in our footage will be the pixels that we keep, and then we'll get rid of the pixels that stay the same. So what I want to do, again, is not be able to see the background. I only want to be able to see the pixels that move, which are the pixels related to the explosion. So that's really perfect for what we want to do. So what we need to first do is isolate our clean plate. So to do that, we've got this very first frame here, and we can actually simply duplicate that frame and freeze it. So what we'll do is select your footage, hit Control D anytime you want to duplicate footage, and I'm going to select the bottom one, which is the one that we'll be using as the clean plate, and I'm going to right click on the timeline on the piece of footage. And you'll see you come up here to that time choice and you can choose freeze frame. And what that's going to do is if I solo this layer, this is something we really haven't talked about yet. Soloing means I only want to look at the visibility for this one layer. What that's going to do is basically make this consistent all across the timeline. So I don't see the explosion in this shot anymore, which is perfect because that will create the difference between our other shot. So I'm going to unsolo that, and now we're just looking at the explosion. Now I want you guys to be able to see a background behind this. So just for our testing purposes, let's grab another picture, just a photo here. Let's do this one, Rubble 2, and I'm going to put it behind everything else. So we've got this image in the background, and that's going to help us just to be able to see where that transparency begins instead of seeing a black background. Or you could just toggle your transparency grid. Either one will work. Okay, so now one of the things you need to do is come in here and actually turn off the visibility for your clean plate. And if it helps you, you can rename this layer to clean plate. So we'll right click, go to rename, and we'll call it clean plate difference. Okay, and I'm going to turn off its visibility because I don't want to be able to see this. It's just a point of reference. Okay, now let's come over here to your window, and we're going to grab our effects and presets panel. So go ahead and open that up, and we don't need the tracker panel for now, so we can X that out. Sometimes you'll notice I'm getting the hourglass. It takes a moment to load up all your effects and presets. There they are. Okay, we'll X out of our tracker panel, and the effect we want to use is a difference mat. So you can just type in the word difference, and that's going to be located right there. Now we want to drop the difference mat onto the piece of footage that we are wanting to have the background cut out of. So that's going to be the footage that's moving, the footage that contains the explosion. So we'll grab that difference mat and drop it onto the explosion.avi. Okay, so now what's happening is everything disappeared. We have total transparency. And the reason for that is because the difference layer automatically defaults to being set to the same layer that you applied the effect to. I'll explain that again. So the difference layer is the layer that we want to tell After Effects to look at for the difference in pixels. But it automatically is setting it to the layer that we applied this difference map to. So that in turn says everything is different, and it makes the whole thing transparent. So let's come over here to this drop down where it says difference layer and change it from the layer that we applied the effect to our clean plate difference. And now what we see is the difference. That is our explosion. These are the pixels that are different from the clean plate that we created. So now I can scrub and we see only the explosion. So very easily we'll be able to get rid of this background that we used with the JPEG. I can just delete it. Maybe we want to switch to our transparency grid. And you can see that now we've got this explosion on a transparent background. Pretty cool. So now what you want to do is start refining this edge. And it might be easier actually to see on a black background that we have a little bit of kind of a pixelated looking edge. And this is just kind of the nature of mattes where you really start to see this happening in pixels. There's not a lot of smooth fall off. But it's easy to achieve with a few different little sliders and maybe possibly an additional effect. So first let's start changing some of the settings here in the difference mat. So we've got a few things to choose from. We've got our matching tolerance, our matching softness, and our blur before difference, which are all at default levels right now. But you can change, say, the matching tolerance. Notice if I crank it up, it's really going to kind of suck in there and start to take a lot away. But if I take this down to 0, I'm actually going to see more. Now, in my case, I actually want this to be a little bit higher because I'm going to start changing a few other effects. So I want this to be wider where I can see more of the sky for me. Matching softness, let's play around with that a little bit. I'm going to turn that up. And you'll see this happens pretty quickly. So by giving myself more room to work with, I can start to turn up that matching softness. And now I have a much softer, less pixelated view. So now instead of all those little pixels, now we've got some of those nice wispy parts of the smoke from that explosion. And I also am getting some of these little kind of bouncy fire pieces here at the ground. And then you can also change your blur before difference, which is going to blur that even further. And sometimes it's not really a very desirable effect, but in small doses it can work nicely. So maybe turning that up a little bit, maybe say to, 10 or 12 or so is maybe going to help your composite. But it's really up to you. If you think it looks better without it, keep it there. So I actually kind of like it better without so much at this point. Now, if you still need to bring this edge in a little bit or refine the edge, you can also use a matte choker, which is another effect. So we'll come up here and just type in choker. And you've got simple choker and matte choker. So for me, I'm going to grab the matte choker and we'll drop that onto our explosion layer. And then you can start playing with these other values. So maybe you want to turn up your geometric softness a little bit. So maybe not quite that far, maybe around 9 or 10. And then you can start to change your choke. So here, that's going to bring it in. Here, that's going to bring it out a little bit. So maybe right in there around -12 or so. And then you've got your gray level softness, which is measured in percentage points. So now that's going to really kind of start to soften that out, which the gray level is kind of that semi-transparent there around the edge. Even though that's gray in my shot in the RGB values, it's talking about the matte. You can see the matte if you want to by coming to this final output and changing that to matte only. You see how this looks very similar to our alpha that we created or that we brought in earlier from our image. We've got the white area showing pixels and the black area hiding them or creating them or making them transparent, and then the gray areas are the areas that are semi-transparent. So you can kind of switch back and forth between those different outputs in the difference matte itself. And then you can also change the geometric softness as well if you want that to be a little more soft here. Now for me, I actually feel like the matte choker was helpful a little bit, but honestly I think I kind of like this harder edge a little bit. So it's up to you which one you want to use. Really it's going to just be what you need for your shot, but you need to know about the matte choker because it's really essential to working with a difference matte, because a lot of times you're not going to get a shot like what we have where the background is so completely still. Sometimes the difference matte needs a matte choker to kind of help it out a little bit. So it just depends. So we can leave that on. Maybe we'll turn it back on later if we need to. But let's come back over to our main robot composition and open up our project panel. And what I want to do is get that explosion comp we created into this comp. So what I can do is just come up here to my compositions folder. And it looks like the composition isn't in it because we created it new and it filed it in that video clips folder. So we'll just grab that explosion composition and put it where it belongs in the compositions folder. And then we can simply grab the explosion composition from this project panel and drop it into our shot. So I want it behind my robot and in front of my ship. So that's where we'll put it. And then we can start to manipulate this so that it covers up however much of the helicopter you want. You see we get this kind of a look. Now this has a longer duration than the rest of our shot. You can see this extends past the timeline. So what I'm going to do is pull this back so that it can maybe end with my other layers just like that. So we do get some of that fire, but then it's going to kind of dissipate. So if you feel, that maybe you need to bring that edge in a little bit more, if you think this looks a little too hazy there, you can always go back in by double clicking that and come back into your explosion.avi, go to your effects and controls and play around a little bit with maybe your matching tolerance. Maybe you want to bring that in just a little bit there so you have less white on the outer edge. Come back into your main composition and see if that helped at all along those edges. Okay? Now you'll also notice that now the whole thing has a little bit more of a transparent look by changing that tolerance, especially in those wider areas earlier in the explosion. It doesn't make as much of a difference later on, but here having that matching tolerance turned up really does make that difference. So it may be important for you to keep that at 0 and then simply use your choke on your mat choker to bring it back down and kind of pull that in on that edge there. Okay? Let's go back to our main robot composition. That actually looks a lot better on the edges especially. Just by turning that mat choker on and changing the choke value a little bit, I am getting something that I like much, much better. Okay, so one of the things you notice is that we're getting these pieces on the ground, which kind of look cool in some places, but also don't really match up in others. Like they kind of look like they're going beneath that line, because in the explosion render, they're going out of frame. So you could keep them if you wanted to, but in my case, I'm just going to mask them out. So I'm just going to grab the pen tool and really quickly draw a little mask around the bottom of this shot and come in here, and we'll change that mask from add to subtract, and then maybe come in here and refine it a little bit, since that cut off quite a bit of the mask. So now I can show you how to quickly edit mask points. Just grab your selection tool and you can grab the points themselves and move them very, very individually. Now let's say, I did that really quickly. I don't really have enough points. I can come up here to my pen tool and grab the add vertex tool. Then I can just add another point, then go back to my selection tool and move that point down into the position that I want, just like this. Now I don't have to have this perfect along the edge, because we're going to add kind of a little wall of fire that will go down through here, but it is important to know that you can add points to masks just like that. And you also, remember, can feather your mask, so maybe you want to come into that mask and add a little bit of feather along the bottom. Now if I want to move the mask as a whole, I can double click on the edge and just maybe move it up a little bit, just like that. Okay, so overall, I'm going to deselect just by clicking a different layer here. This looks pretty great. We're really starting to get some awesome looking things happening in our footage. And in our next lesson, we are going to move on to speed masking. So we're just going to mask out lots of rubble and add it to our shot. And so we're really learning a lot of techniques for masking, but that is a very important part of a compositor's role. And what we just did there with the explosion mask that we created at the bottom is called a garbage mask. It's not a very refined mask where you're going very meticulously along the edges. It's just to cut out parts of a mat that are still revealing areas you don't want. So you created a garbage mask and you didn't even realize it. Super easy, and we really learned the hard masking techniques first. So stick around, and in the next lesson we're going to do some speed masking to get the rest of the rubble into our shot. In this lesson, we're going to mask the rest of the rubble and place it in our shot with speed masking. Okay, so to speed mask this stuff, it's going to be similar to garbage masking. We're just really quickly going to come in and mask the edges of our photos that contain rubble. So let's just grab this first one and we'll drop it on, just for now, on top of the robot. Now this one might not be as fast as you may want, because we have a lot of edges here. But you do need to get some practice in masking. So we'll just grab the pen tool And let's just come in here along this edge and kind of start creating a mask just by left clicking. There's lots of jagged edges, so you don't really need to worry so much about getting all your Bezier handles pulled out or just right. It's still going pretty quickly because the edges of them are just so straight here. Okay, so we're just kind of coming in here, roughing this mask in to really feel like we're going to cut out the background and then be able to place this shot of rubble into our scene that we're creating here. It's really amazing what the power of something like a mask and a photo can do for your composite, because even a still image like this can bring so much life and more interest to otherwise, you know, okay shot. We do have a pretty interesting shot with our robot coming along there, rolling in the street, but now we're really giving him a reason to roll down through the street. He's jumping away from this big explosion where all of this destruction has happened, and maybe, you know, we don't know if this robot is you know, friendly or not. Maybe he's the one that caused the explosion on the street, but it doesn't matter. He has a reason that he's jumping into action rather than just, you know, having a composite of the robot on the background. So we'll come in here and I'm going to leave those rocks. We'll just kind of go around it, leave that little gap there, and then just kind of add this, and then we'll just come up through this side just kind of like that to finish that edge off. And we'll close that mask, and now we've got this really awesome piece of rubble of the sidewalk. So what we can do is grab the piece of rubble and let's place this behind the ship, kind of parallel with the car. So I'm going to scale it down. So we'll come into our transform and turn the scale down pretty significantly, just right in there. And I'm going to rotate it up just a bit like this to kind of flatten it out a little bit better. And then I want to place this again behind the ship and the explosion, really even behind the sinkhole, just like that. And then we'll move this up just by left clicking in the middle and dragging this. Now I kind of want the more, you know, tall part of it to be over here by the cars and things. So we can actually flip it pretty easily. So what I can do is right click the image, and we'll come up here to transform. We're going to choose flip horizontal. And honestly, all that does, if we come back into our transform options, is it puts a negative sign in front of the X value of your scale. So if your scale has been scaled uniformly and you flip horizontal and then you try to uniformly scale again, it will actually by default flip it back over and take that effect off. So if you have trouble and you start trying to scale this some more and it's moving it because you're holding shift to scale uniformly, you can just come back in and put the negative sign in front of that scale. Okay? Let's rotate this again, kind of up in this direction, and we'll move this kind of back over there behind the car. Okay, so let's see what this looks like here. I don't want to move my robot, and I accidentally grabbed him because he's kind of in the way. So what we can do, if you want the robot to remain there but you don't want to accidentally grab him and move him around, is you can come over here and lock that layer. And in fact, we can lock the robot, the explosion, the ship, and the sinkhole because we don't want to accidentally grab any of those as we're working quickly here. Okay, so I'm just positioning this rubble kind of over here. I maybe even want to make it a little bit smaller, so I just won't scale it uniformly. We'll just scale it a little bit by itself. And now I'm able to see a little bit more of it. Okay, so now we've got that rubble in place. Let's actually do a little bit more with that same piece here. So let's duplicate it and maybe place it in a slightly different position. So to duplicate, you'll remember we select the layer and hit Control D. And I want this to kind of be in front of this here, but I don't want it to look so similar. So let's flip it in the other direction. And remember, we can do that by toggling down the transform and going into our scale. And I'll just change this so it doesn't have the negative sign in front of it. And now it's going to flip it the other direction. Now it is upside down now, so I can just flip this back over here. And I also need to come in and take the negative off of the 50 as well. There we go. So now we have this, and it looks like it's actually moving that negative sign from piece to piece because we have this scale linked still. So we need to unlink it and then come in there and take that negative sign off. Now that's in the right position. Okay, so we'll rotate that back, and let's just kind of place it down here, sort of behind the robot and in front of the car, just like that. And it really is just adding to feeling like that really belongs back there. If you feel like it's too large, you could scale it down a little bit just by coming in here, maybe and editing those values. And then we'll just move it over slightly further. Maybe later on we could put a little bit of fire in between those two spots of rubble. Okay, that's looking really nice. Let's move on and add another piece. I'm going to grab my rubble 2. We'll drop it on here. This one, let's mask a little more quickly. So I'm going to grab my pen tool and just kind of quickly go along the top of this just by clicking kind of fast. And we'll just come in there on the edge and just create a mask just really fast like that. And then I want to place this behind my explosion, kind of over here to the side. So we'll place this pretty much behind everything that's involved with the ship. And we'll place this kind of over here. I'm going to scale it down by grabbing the edge and holding Shift, just like that. So we've got kind of this large wall of rubble. Maybe a little bit too large if I want to make it a little bit smaller here. Just grabbing the edge and holding Shift. Okay. And I'm just going to have this edge of it kind of hang off the side so we don't see that edge that we created with the mask. Okay, that's looking pretty good. Let's add another piece. We've got our rubble 3 over here, so we'll grab this one and place that. It's kind of a smaller piece of rubble, and I just kind of want to use this area here in front, so we can just kind of quickly come across a few of the tops of the rocks. It's pretty jagged on its own, so don't worry too much about getting this part perfect. And then we'll just kind of come down here onto that edge and then close the mask. And again, if you want to edit some of your mask points, it's really easy to just do by selecting those. Let's place this one in front of our crash here to kind of bridge the gap between this piece of rubble and the crash. So let's just kind of move this right over there. And this needs to be, again, behind our robot, but it will be in front of the sinkhole. So I'll place that just there because this will be covering that up. Also going to be in front of the ship and the explosion. So it's really only behind our robot in this case. And we can scale it down a little bit if we need to. And in this case, I think I'd actually like to maybe add a little bit of feather to my mask. But but I don't have to feather the mask uniformly. This isn't something we've really talked about yet. You can actually use a new tool that's up here with the tools we've been using to mask, which is the mask feather tool. And it's different from just feathering that mask feather property. So if we grab this, I can click on a mask edge, and it's going to add this little different kind of circle. And I can pull this out, and that's going to show me where it's feathering. But I can also add another point up here, maybe over here, so that what will happen is that mask is going to suck down onto that point, and then where those circles have been pulled away from the mask, that is the edge it will feather on. So I can maybe add another one over here and then move it over. So now I've got a feather along the ground where I want it to integrate, and a hard edge along the top where I want it to maybe be a little bit more of a hard edge. Now it doesn't have to be totally hard. I can kind of come in here and maybe pull it off a little bit, but you just see that I'm able to very quickly and easily vary the feather and the rate at which it's feathered around my image. So if I deselect just by maybe clicking a different layer, you can kind of see what that looks like. And again, it's not perfect, but if we're at 100% right here, it looks pretty good from farther away. So that's kind of the key with this sort of compositing where you're using lots of photos. And once we add blur and heat distortion and color correction, it's really going to integrate very, very nicely. Okay, we've got one more piece of rubble that I want to add, which is rubble 4. And we'll just drop this on here. And this one's already a little bit out of focus, which is fine because a lot of things are going to get blurred in a little bit of time. Let's do the same thing. We'll grab our pen tool and just very quickly kind of mask along the edge of this piece of rubble. And we'll just come in here. I'm going to leave a little bit of this ground in the front so we have something to work with there. And then let's zoom out a bit. With your layer selected, we'll scale this down. I'm going to rotate this to kind of flatten that line out with the ground. And this one I am going to, this is in front of everything, and we'll leave it like that. So this one's kind of just creating that seam there. So you can decide on how big you want this to be. I really don't want it too big because I do want to still be able to see that helicopter behind there. So I might actually scale this one down a bit, maybe move it down a little bit lower. So we've got a few different pieces to work with. This one again, I think we can have a really nice mask feather effect. So let's kind of feather this here on the front side. So we'll just add a few points along there and a few here on the back. And then we'll just come in and grab the ones that are circles to pull that feather out. And then I'll keep these a little bit closer. So it's feathering very, very slightly, but not nearly as much as what we need on the ground. Okay, that looks pretty good. And again, once we color correct that, it's going to really, really integrate nicely with the ground that we already have there. Okay, so you can play around a little bit maybe in between lessons with the way that you want this to look along the ground, but overall I think we've gotten this rubble in place really, really nicely. Now in our next lesson I want to start adding some fire, and we're going to learn about blending modes and collapse transformation. In this lesson, we're going to mask the rest of the rubble and place it in our shot with speed masking. Okay, so to speed mask this stuff, it's going to be similar to garbage masking. We're just really quickly going to come in and mask the edges of our photos that contain rubble. So let's just grab this first one and we'll drop it on just for now on top of the robot. Now this one might not be as fast as you may want because we have a lot of edges here, but you do need to get some practice in masking. So we'll just grab the pen tool and let's just come in here along this edge and kind of start creating a mask just by left clicking. There's lots of jagged edges, so you don't really need to worry so much about getting all your Bezier handles pulled out or just right, it's still going pretty quickly because the edges of them are just so straight here. Okay, so we're just kind of coming in here, roughing this mask in to really feel like we're going to cut out the background and then be able to place this shot of rubble into our scene that we're creating here. It's really amazing what the power of something like a mask and a photo can do for your composite, because even a still image like this can bring so much life and more interest to otherwise, you know, okay shot. We do have a pretty interesting shot with our robot coming along there, rolling in the street, but now we're really giving him a reason to roll down through the street. He's jumping away from this big explosion where all of this destruction has happened, and maybe, you know, we don't know if this robot is you know, friendly or not. Maybe he's the one that caused the explosion on the street, but it doesn't matter. He has a reason that he's jumping into action rather than just, you know, having a composite of the robot on the background. So we'll come in here and I'm going to leave those rocks. We'll just kind of go around it, leave that little gap there, and then just kind of add this, and then we'll just come up through this side, just kind of like that, to finish that edge off. And we'll close that mask, and now we've got this really awesome piece of rubble of the sidewalk. So what we can do is grab the piece of rubble, and let's place this behind the ship, kind of parallel with the car. So I'm going to scale it down. So we'll come into our transform and turn the scale down pretty significantly, just right in there. And I'm going to rotate it up just a bit like this to kind of flatten it out a little bit better. And then I want to place this again behind the ship and the explosion, really even behind the sinkhole, just like that. And then we'll move this up just by left clicking in the middle and dragging this. Now I kind of want the more, you know, tall part of it to be over here by the cars and things. So we can actually flip it pretty easily. So what I can do is right click the image, and we'll come up here to transform. You're going to choose flip horizontal. And honestly, all that does, if we come back into our transform options, is it puts a negative sign in front of the X value of your scale. So if your scale has been scaled uniformly and you flip horizontal and then you try to uniformly scale again, it will actually by default flip it back over and take that effect off. So if you have trouble and you start trying to scale this some more and it's moving it because you're holding shift to scale uniformly, you can just come back in and put the negative sign in front of that scale. Okay, let's rotate this again kind of up in this direction, and we'll move this kind of back over there behind the car. Okay, so let's see what this looks like here. I don't want to move my robot, and I accidentally grabbed him because he's kind of in the way. So what we can do, if you want the robot to remain there but you don't want to accidentally grab him and move him around, is you can come over here and lock that layer. And in fact, we can lock the robot, the explosion, the ship, and the sinkhole, because we don't want to accidentally grab any of those as we're working quickly here. Okay, so I'm just positioning this rubble kind of over here. I maybe even want to make it a little bit smaller. So I just won't scale it uniformly. We'll just scale it a little bit by itself. And now I'm able to see a little bit more of it. Okay, so now we've got that rubble in place. Let's actually do a little bit more with that same piece here. So let's duplicate it and maybe place it in a slightly different position. So to duplicate, you'll remember we select the layer and hit Control D. And I want this to kind of be in front of this here, but I don't want it to look so similar. So let's flip it in the other direction. And remember, we can do that by toggling down the transform and going into our scale and I'll just change this so it doesn't have the negative sign in front of it. And now it's going to flip it the other direction. Now it is upside down now, so I can just flip this back over here. And I also need to come in and take the negative off of the 50 as well. There we go. So now we have this, and it looks like it's actually moving that negative sign from piece to piece because we have this scale linked still. So we need to unlink it and then come in there and take that negative sign off. Now that's in the right position. Okay, so we'll rotate that back, and let's just kind of place it down here, sort of behind the robot and in front of the car, just like that. And it really is just adding to feeling like that really belongs back there. If you feel like it's too large, you could scale it down a little bit just by coming in here, maybe and editing those values. And then we'll just move it over slightly further. Maybe later on we could put a little bit of fire in between those two spots of rubble. Okay, that's looking really, really nice. Let's move on and add another piece. I'm going to grab my rubble 2. We'll drop it on here. This one, let's mask a little more quickly. So I'm going to grab my pen tool and just kind of quickly go along the top of this just by clicking kind of fast. And we'll just come in there on the edge and just create a mask just really, really fast like that. And then I want to place this behind my explosion, kind of over here to the side. So we'll place this pretty much behind everything that's involved with the ship. And we'll place this kind of over here. I'm going to scale it down by grabbing the edge and holding shift, just like that. So we've got kind of this large wall of rubble. Maybe a little bit too large if I want to make it a little bit smaller here. Just grabbing the edge and holding shift. Okay. And I'm just going to have this edge of it kind of hang off the side so we don't see that edge that we created with the mask. Okay, that's looking pretty good. Let's add another piece. We've got our rubble 3 over here, so we'll grab this one and place that. It's kind of a smaller piece of rubble, and I just kind of want to use this area here in the front, so we can just kind of quickly come across a few of the tops of the rocks. It's pretty jagged on its own, so don't worry too much about getting this part perfect. And then we'll just kind of come down here onto that edge and then close the mask. And again, if you want to edit some of your mask points, it's really easy to just do by selecting those. Let's place this one in front of our crash here to kind of bridge the gap between this piece of rubble and the crash. So let's just kind of move this right over there. And this needs to be, again, behind our robot, but it will be in front of the sinkhole. So I'll place that just there because this will be covering that up. It's also going to be in front of the ship and the explosion. So it's really only behind our robot in this case. And we can scale it down a little bit if we need to. And in this case, I think I'd actually like to maybe add a little bit of feather to my mask, but I don't have to feather the mask uniformly. This isn't something we've really talked about yet. You can actually use a new tool that's up here with the tools we've been using to mask, which is the mask feather tool. And it's different from just feathering that mask feather property. So if we grab this, I can click on a mask edge, and it's going to add this little different kind of circle. And I can pull this out, and that's going to show me where it's feathering. But I can also add another point up here, maybe over here, so that what will happen is that mask is going to suck down onto that point, and then where those circles have been pulled away from the mask, that is the edge it will feather on. So I can maybe add another one over here and then move it over. So now I've got a feather along the ground where I want it to integrate, and a hard edge along the top where I want it to maybe be a little bit more of a hard edge. Now it doesn't have to be totally hard. I can kind of come in here and maybe pull it off a little bit, but you just see that I'm able to very quickly and easily vary the feather and the rate at which it's feathered around my image. So if I deselect just by maybe clicking a different layer, you can kind of see what that looks like. And again, it's not perfect, but if we're at 100% right here, it looks pretty good from farther away. So that's kind of the key with this sort of compositing where you're using lots of photos. And once we add blur and heat distortion and color correction, it's really going to integrate very, very nicely. Okay, we've got one more piece of rubble that I want to add, which is rubble 4. And we'll just drop this on here. And this one's already a little bit out of focus, which is fine because a lot of things are going to get blurred in a little bit of time. Let's do the same thing. We'll grab our pen tool and just very quickly kind of mask along the edge of this piece of rubble. And we'll just come in here. I'm going to leave a little bit of this ground in the front so we have something to work with there. And then let's zoom out a bit. With your layer selected, we'll scale this down. I'm going to rotate this to kind of flatten that line out with the ground. And this one I am going to, this is in front of everything, and we'll leave it like that. So this one's kind of just creating that seam there. So you can decide on how big you want this to be. I really don't want it too big because I do want to still be able to see that helicopter behind there. So I might actually scale this one down a bit, maybe move it down a little bit lower. So we've got a few different pieces to work with. This one again, I think we can have a really nice mask feather effect. So let's kind of feather this here on the front side. So we'll just add a few points along there and a few here on the back. And then we'll just come in and grab the ones that are circles to pull that feather out. And then I'll keep these a little bit closer. So it's feathering very, very slightly, but not nearly as much as what we need on the ground. Okay, that looks pretty good. And again, once we color correct that, it's going to really, really integrate nicely with the ground that we already have there. Okay, so you can play around a little bit maybe in between lessons with the way that you want this to look along the ground, but overall I think we've gotten this rubble in place really, really nicely. Now in our next lesson I want to start adding some fire, and we're going to learn about blending modes and collapse transformations. So stick around and we'll learn how to work those features in the next lesson. In this lesson, we're going to learn about blending modes and collapse transformations. Okay, so first, to start working with these blending modes, I'm going to add some fire to our composition. So let's come up here to our video clips, and I'm going to grab that fire PNG sequence. So first, I want to put some fire kind of behind my rubble and a little bit in front of my basically the ship here. It's still going to be in front of this explosion, but you'll notice that we can't see it really as much fire, and there would definitely be some fire on the ground after an explosion like that. So just a couple little cleanup things we need to do very quickly before we fix that. My explosion, I'm going to unlock really quickly and just edit its mask ever so slightly just to grab that little piece of fire we had over there. And then my rubble 4 needs to go, looks like behind my robot. So let's see if that fixed our issue. That looks much, much better. Okay, let's grab our fire and place it behind our rubbles. But we do want it in front of the explosion and in front of the ship, so it'll just go right there. Okay, so what you'll notice is we've got a big wall of fire here that has a black background. But we can tell this black background to blend with our shot in a way that we're only seeing the fire. And because this fire has a pretty consistent color throughout it, we'll be able to use this in a way that works really nicely with our shot. So we're going to use a blending mode to do that. And if you've toggled your switches and modes to do the track map from a few lessons ago and you haven't changed that, you'll have your modes already open right here on the timeline. So right here where it says normal next to where we were using track map, if I click that, you see you have a whole bunch of different choices here. Now you can kind of go through one by one and choose different ways to blend this. And it's going to change based on every single different kind of layer and the different colors in the pixels of the layer that you're changing this with. So some are going to work better than others. Sometimes multiply is going to look awesome. In this case, it doesn't really work as well. And I have found that add works really nicely with this fire. And you can see that we still get a little bit of the transparency in the fire itself. I can still kind of see the background, which is really nice. But we still have that beautiful orange color for the fire. So I'm going to go ahead and place this kind of up over here, and then we can scale it down a little bit, maybe kind of make it a little bit shorter. And that way, whenever we're further on here, we still are able to see some really awesome fire behind the rubble. Now, one of the things I'm noticing is that the edge of this fire is pretty harsh. So we'll probably want to mask that in a moment. But I think I actually would like to have maybe a couple other pieces of fire too. So let's grab that piece of fire and duplicate it by hitting Control D. And you'll notice that that got a little bit brighter looking. And if we move this over, one of the awesome things about the Add Blend mode is that the edge of it is or the edges that overlap are going to cause that effect to look a little bit brighter, which works really nicely with this fire. Okay, so now that I have these two layers, I want to pre-compose them because I want my fire to be able to just be one layer that we work with here. And then we'll want to mask just that one layer because, again, it's two layers that's causing that hard edge to be visible, you'll see. So let's go ahead and fix that by pre-composing. So we'll select both of our layers by shift selecting, and we'll hit Control Shift C, and let's call this Crash Fire, and go ahead and say OK. And one of the things you'll notice is that we lost that effect of our blending mode. So basically what happened was when that was pre-composed, we were pre-composing two layers. So an attribute, like a mode, anytime it's more than one layer, is going to go inside of the pre-comp. So if we go into our pre-comp, you'll see the blending modes are still set to add, but when the pre-comp is created, we don't have those blending modes visible anymore because it defaults back to normal. Now, you could just set this to add, and that would fix your problem. But what if you had something else in that pre-comp, say another piece of rubble that you didn't want to have the blend mode? You see, if I change this rubble piece to add, it doesn't really look right. So what you can do instead of simply changing the blending mode again is use something called collapse transformations. So we'll toggle our switches and modes again to get back to our switches. And collapse transformation is going to be this little switch right here. And you'll see that it has a little bit of a stipulation. For a comp layer or composition layer, it is working as collapse transformations. If it's a vector layer, it's continuously rasterized. Now we're not really going to get into the vector layer because we're not really working with any vector things in our composite here. But if you do check this for a vector layer, eventually it's basically going to continuously make a vector layer look smooth. So if you scale something vector up really big and it looks pixelated, try this continuously rasterize option and see how it works. Now for a comp layer, which means it has other layers inside of it, collapse transformations is what this function will be, and it is amazing. Collapse transformations allows you to do so many things that we aren't even going to discuss in this course. Things with 3D that you never maybe thought were possible. But in my case, what collapse transformations will do is it basically is saying, look inside of this composition for attribute data. So if it's a piece of data like a blending mode, and I turn on collapse transformations, I get that add mode back. So basically what it does is it says for attributes like this one right here, which is the mode that it's in, if it's like a quality type of thing, like a resolution, if you have it at draft or something, it's going to be based on the layer inside of it, not on the comp setting. And then this column we haven't really talked about, which is for motion blur. That now has to be set up inside of this comp at the layer level, and that would just be, if that button was checked on, that would have the inherent motion blur of After Effects, which we're actually going to be using Post Effects for motion blur, so that one doesn't really matter as much. What is important is if we got our blending mode back. So if I double click in here, you see those blending modes are set to add. Let's say if maybe I change one of them to normal. If I come back out to my main comp, that is going to look normal because it is inheriting the normal blending mode from inside of the comp. So we'll go back in here and switch that one back because I want it to be set to add. And now let's maybe add a little bit of a mask here to the edge so it doesn't look so hard. And we can do it really easily now because we only have one layer to mask because it's been pre-composed. So let's come over here and grab our pen tool, and I'm just going to make kind of a jagged mask along that fire edge. And I might end up changing it a little bit if I feel like it was too jagged. But the point is that you just get a line on there. And then we'll come in, and I'm going to switch my mask to inverted. Now you will notice that one of the stipulations of being able to use a mask is if you have that collapse transformations turned on, and that is how you're getting a blending mode, it disables that function. So in the end, we do have to turn our blending mode back to add instead of using collapse transformations for it. Or we can simply delete the mask just by selecting that, deleting it. You see we get the blending mode back, and we can mask it on the inside. So we'll just draw our mask here. I'm just going to, with that bottom one selected, just kind of come in here and draw that jagged mask again. And because I don't have my background set up to show transparency, I'm going to click that toggle transparent so I can see this a little bit better. We want this mask to be set to subtract. And then we'll come in here and let's feather that out a little bit on the edge. Okay? And then I'll grab my other mask, or my other layer rather, and we'll mask it on the edge. Just kind of a jagged little mask again. And come in here and we'll feather this one and change it from add to subtract. So there are ways to get around if you want to be able to collapse your transformations to get those blending modes, and you also need to mask. There are ways to do that, like how we did here, and it actually might be easier to work with on the outside by having the masks on the inside of the pre-comp because we're able to not have to worry about accidentally grabbing the points whenever we try to grab the layer. So let's come back out to our main robot composition to see that just kind of having those masks there made that a lot easier to believe that that fire is really there. And I am noticing maybe there's a little bit of an issue with these edges looking a little bit hard. So we'll solo a layer here, and we'll just create less of a hard edge by adding another mask. So we'll come in here, set that to subtract as well, turn up the feathering just very slightly there, and then we'll solo our other layer. And again, I'm soloing this because I don't want to get confused by which edge I'm trying to draw the mask along, since they are so similar. And we'll feather this mask a little bit also. And again, you want to make sure you change it to subtract. Okay, so we'll unsolo that. Now we've got both of them here, and you see that hard edge on the inside of where those were overlapping has been broken up really nicely. And if you feel like maybe they're too similar by just having them duplicated side by side, you could select one of them, right-click it, go up to transform and choose flip horizontal, and now you get kind of a slightly different look. Maybe you even want to kind of squish it down a little bit so it looks a little more broken up. And you could also maybe grab that same piece, duplicate it again, hitting Control D. Now that you've already masked it, we don't have to worry about doing that again. And maybe this one is a little bit taller, so it will even further break up any kind of issues you have in the middle with them looking like they're too similar. So now from farther away, that's going to look very, very real and not too symmetrical. So we'll come back out to our main robot composition, and you can see when I scrub forward or even backwards a little bit, we've got a really nice looking fire here. And if you want to, you can select your fire and maybe scale it down a little bit. You need to keep it behind that rubble if you feel like the edge doesn't look quite right. So just right in there. Just kind of fixing that little edge. Okay, so now as I'm scrubbing, this is really starting to look very, very nice. Like we've really got some interesting things happening. And you could play around with whether or not you want the fire we just added to be behind the explosion or not. You're still going to be able to see it, but now the smoke will kind of cover it up a little bit. So it really depends on what you want to be more prominent. It really isn't a wrong way. I kind of like being able to see the flames up a little bit higher, so I'll leave my stacking order the way it is. But I love that about the layer-based workflow. It's really easy to quickly change the way that those are stacking on top of each other and just figure out what you think looks best. Now in our next lesson, we're going to start doing some tracking to kind of fix the places that we've got some issues over here with all of these assets we've added because we have something called parallax happening. You'll notice that my robot moves faster than, say, this traffic light. And because these things are farther back and closer to the traffic light, they're going to move more slowly than my robot, so I can't use the same tracking data for them, or they're not going to truly stick to the ground. Now, in between lessons, I want you to practice something. I want you to take this crash fire that we just created and see if you can't get some fire to look good, maybe behind this little piece of rubble that we have over here, that rubble one that we've got right up there by the car. Duplicate that crash fire, play with it, see if you can get it to be behind there. And in the next lesson, we'll come back and begin tracking for parallax and applying that data to the different pieces of our comp to really make those feel like they stick to the ground and they actually exist in this little world that we're creating. In this lesson, we'll be doing some additional tracking to our robot track to account for the parallax in our shot and create data that our composited rubble and fire can stick to. Okay, so for a moment, I'm going to turn off the robot because I don't want to be distracted by seeing him there. So what we need to do is create a few different tracks based on how far away different parts of our composite are from our camera. And really they're technically all at the same place because they're all flat. None of these are 3D images. But I do just want to make sure that we are tracking enough points so that they stick nicely. So probably these two pieces right here will need their own bit of data. Then we'll do one for the elements surrounding the ship, and then have one for this piece of rubble back here, and then probably one for this rubble and this piece of fire. So a few different tracks to keep track of. So let's create a few nulls for those different tracks that we're talking about. So I'll come up here and go to Layer, New Null Object, and we'll rename this one, and let's call this one Close Rubble Track. And then we'll create another one, New Null Object, right click to rename it, and we'll call this one Ship Elements Track. And then we'll create another new layer, Null Object, right click to rename, and we'll call this one Far Rubble Track. And then we'll create another one that is going to be for these pieces, which is actually really close to the car. So we could call that one Car Rubble Track. So we'll go Layer, New, Null Object, right click, rename, Car Rubble Track. Okay, so we got to create 4 more tracks for these elements. So I'm going to grab these by shift selecting, and we'll bring them down here beneath our robot track. And then let's just get started. So what I want to do is come up here to these 2 close pieces of rubble that we know we're going to be tracking for, and I'm going to turn off their visibility, or I can solo them. So you can kind of see what it looks like with them soloed, just so you can see we need to pay attention in our shot to elements in our moving footage that are really close on the ground to these 2 pieces. So that's what we're looking for. So I will turn off their visibility so that we can take a really close look at our ground. And if I toggle them back on, okay, I see something that is going to work really nicely for this. And that's this little stick line right here. So let's go ahead and track that. I'm all zoomed in on my composition, and I'll come down to my street again. Let's close our effects and presets and open our tracker. And we'll click Track Motion like always. And we'll click between the search region and the feature region and position this. Okay, so we'll be zoomed in here. And my search area, search region, I'm gonna make a little bit bigger. And then we'll make this a little bit bigger as well to encompass that whole stick. And then let's put our attach point kind of right on the edge where that stick meets the concrete, just like that. This is going to allow for a really good track. So you'll notice that I had scrubbed all the way to the end of the scene. So it's okay that I did that. I'll just track backwards this time, or analyze backwards instead of forwards. So go ahead and click that. And you'll see that it is taking a little bit of a longer amount of time because we do have a larger area that we're searching within, which is fine. It doesn't take too long. And we may end up with actually better data by doing it that way. Now, I do seem to have gotten some up and down jitters, but that will be okay because we'll only apply the X data just like we did before. So we'll come up here to Edit Target. We know that we want to choose the Close Rubble Track because that's what we were tracking for. We'll go ahead and say OK. And then let's go ahead and apply the data. We'll hit Apply. X only is what we want, so we'll say OK. And what I want to do now is come back up to my pieces we turned off, our 2 spots of rubble, turn them back on, and we can actually shift select these and parent them at the same time. So you only have to have both of them selected, but you only have to grab one of their pick whips, and we can take them down here and parent it to the close rubble track. Now I want you to pay attention to something. If I have my cursor or my current time indicator here at the beginning of my shot, that is important to pay attention to, because whatever position those pieces are in when I release the pick whip and my current time indicator is here at the beginning, now those are going to follow along in that way. Now if I undo that and I, let's say, scrub to the end, now they're going to be in a slightly different position in relation to the shot. So you see, I undid that, so now they move. So at first they were sticking from here over. Now if I scrub to the end, and again I have both of them selected, and I grab my parenting pick whip, and we come up here and parent to close rubble track. Now they're going to be stuck over here. So you see how they've moved over from where they were at the beginning. So whatever place your current time indicator is on and you parent at that moment in time, that is going to have an effect on the way that your items will grab that data and then be offset from it. And that's part of the reason why we can move them around and not have the offset problem, because they're not snapping into any absolute position. So you can move them back over if something kind of gets off and isn't where you want it to be. But honestly, I actually really like the positioning of all of this stuff when we're at the end. I like that it's a little bit further over. So I'm going to leave my current time indicator at the end of our shot, and we'll parent with that in mind from now on. Okay? So let's create a few more tracks. We've kind of got the hang of it now. And now that we have that track set up, I'm going to turn off the visibility of those pieces of rubble. And now let's track something for our ship. So we've got crash fire, explosion, ship, and sinkhole. So we've got a lot of stuff that we're tracking for here. But all we have to do is keep in mind that we just need it to be on the same plane as kind of all across the shot. So this big crack in the sidewalk is pretty close to that. It's in front of the car, but it is a little bit closer to us. So I'm going to track right there. So let's come down here. We'll select our street again, click track motion, and I'm just going to left click and drag between the search and feature regions. And we've got this nice big kind of crosshair right there. And I can leave that about the same size and really get a very good result from a track like this. So with my areas just set up in the way that they are, I'm going to analyze backwards. Since my current time indicator was at the end of the shot, we'll analyze back to the beginning, and the data is set. So now we'll edit our target. We'll come in here and we'll set that up to the ship elements track. Go ahead and say OK, apply. We will apply to X only again in this case. So you say OK, and then with our current time indicator at the end of the shot, we want to make sure that's where we are, we'll grab our crash fire all the way down to the sinkhole, which in this case we have locked. So we'll need to unlock those to be able to select them. So crash fire, explosion, ship, and sinkhole. And we'll grab our parenting pick whip, drag it down to our ship elements track, and those will now be parented and move along. Now I'm going to leave them turned off because we're trying to get the rest of our tracking finished up here. We've got 2 more to do. So let's see, for this one we could probably track an element for this further away rubble. We actually may end up needing to do 2 tracks. We may need to do one for this spot right here and one for here, because this one's actually quite a bit further away. So let's say that this one is far rubble, and then we'll call this one trash rubble. So I'll create another one. We'll come up here and create a new null object. No problem. We'll rename this one to trash rubble track. And we'll just pull that down with our other trackers, or our other null tracks. And let's turn off the trash rubble for a moment. And let's see where we need to track for that. Looks like we've got a couple of choices. I think that this little G though on this sign would actually probably work really nicely, or we could maybe do like this little spot right here. However, you do need to keep in mind that it may move out of the shot. It's possible for that to move out of the shot later on. So I think what we should do here is probably do this G, because it's pretty close here to being a high contrast point. So what we'll do is come down here again to our street, hit track motion, and we'll move up here to that little G sign. Or it might be an 8. It's kind of hard to tell. And then we'll just analyze backwards. And again, we'll just do the X data so it remains the way that we want it to. It does look like we get a little bit of a downwards movement with this one, but I think we'll still be okay with just using X data. So let's edit our target. We'll choose our trash rubble track. Okay. Apply X only. And I'm just kind of making sure that I'm parenting as I go so I don't forget to parent anything. So again, we'll grab our trash rubble, which is going to be, I believe, this one right here. Yep, that's the right one. And we'll grab our parent. And instead of the pick whip, you can actually just come down there to the drop down, and our trash rubble is going to be right there. So we'll just choose it from there. So that's another way to parent just from the list of the columns. Okay, so let's take a look at what else we have. Looks like we need to do 2 more tracks, one for the fire in this piece of rubble and one for this piece of rubble. So we'll come back in the next lesson and actually finish up tracking and applying that tracking data for our parallax. In this lesson, we're going to finish up tracking for parallax and applying our data. Okay, so in the last lesson, we were almost done. We just had a few more to track for. So for this one, it's pretty clear if you kind of scrub through here that traffic light, that green light, is pretty parallel with this piece back here, the far away one. So let's go ahead and track for that. We'll just, again, grab our street piece of footage, click track motion, and you want to make sure that it actually created a new tracker, and it looks like it did. It just was a little strange that it put it right in the same spot as our last one. Okay, so we'll move over here, and we'll place this on our green light, which is really great for having that data. And in this case, I was at the beginning of the track, so we'll track forward. Very nice. Edit our target, and that's going to be our far rubble track. Okay, we'll go ahead and apply that to the X only. And then let's come in here and get that applied. We'll come up to, let's see what piece that is. That's going to be this one right here, our Rubble 1 JPEG. So come down and you can parent that to the far rubble track. Well, let's just scrub to see if that's actually working. Looks good to me. Okay, so it's good because it's so far away that we do see a little bit of a change there. So if we come in here, you see that we do have data, but it's nice just seeing that it moves so much more slowly than other pieces. Okay, so let's now come in here and we will track for these last two pieces, and I'm actually going to track the car for this one. So let's track kind of right in here where the bottom of the car meets the wheel of that other car, and we kind of have that nice area there. So we'll grab our street again, track motion, and we'll come down here and just kind of go there, right there on that corner. And that actually is good size for us. So we'll just track forward since we were at the beginning. And we'll edit our target. This time, last one to be the car rubble track. And we'll hit OK. Go to apply, X only, OK, and now we can actually collapse back up that street, so we don't have to have all that tracking data visible anymore. And we'll come in here, we've got these two pieces. We can, this time instead of parenting pick whip, let's go to our drop down, and I'm going to choose the car rubble track, which is layer 15. It's going out of the recording area. But you'll be able to see it if you go into those drop downs, 4 from the bottom. And there you have it, our rubble crash fire, and everything has been painted. So let's go ahead and turn back on all the visibility of everything. And I'm going to pull this down a little bit. We'll X out of our tracker for a moment. And let's play this back because I want to see what this rubble is looking like as it's sticking in the background. And it's going to have some really nice parallax because we took so much care with our tracking. Yeah, that looks great. I mean, it really appears that there's parts, you know, you can definitely see the robots moving so much faster than this piece of rubble, and then this piece of rubble here in the background almost looks like it's not moving at all. Just really careful to make sure that we're doing the best job we can on tracking for those pieces of parallax. Okay, so now that we have that all sorted out, one way that we can also integrate this better is with kind of fixing up our color correction a little bit. So we've got some areas that do not look very integrated simply because they have the wrong color on the ground. So let's go in the next lesson and we'll start adding some effects that will change the color of these rubble elements to look like they actually belong with the street color here. So stick around and I'll show you how to edit that in the next lesson. In this lesson, we're going to do some color correction for our rubble. Okay, so my robot's kind of in the way again, and so I'm going to turn his visibility off for a moment so we can focus on these pieces that need to be color corrected. And because they're all from a lot of different photos, almost every single one of them needs to have a little color correction. So let's come up here to Window, and we're going to open back up our Effects and Presets panel. And I'm going to type in an effect that we'll be using for this color correction. And that's going to be our levels effect. But if you just type in levels, you're going to get these two different levels effect. we've got just the regular levels, and then we've got levels with individual controls, which in my case is what I want. That's going to allow me to control the R, G, and B channels separately, which is what creates the color of our images. So let's first start with this little piece of rubble that's closest to us, and we'll drop that levels effect. Either you can drop it on the layer here or the layer here. It's not going to make a difference. Still be applied. Okay, so let's first kind of analyze what we're seeing here. I definitely see a lot more red in the streak right there than what I see in this. This one looks more yellow. So to pump up the red, we can drop down that red channel here. And we'll come into our red gamma and just kind of start to turn that up a little bit. So we're making it more red to kind of match with the shot. Now, this one also looks to have a little more green in it. So let's drop down the green, and we can turn up the green gamma very slightly as well. Not too much, or it's going to really start to look yellow. Now, I also have kind of a little bit of a brightness issue right here. So with my layer selected, make sure I'm grabbing that, we will come in here to this area at the top, and this is black and white slider is what's going to control the brightness. So if I come in here and I bring that white area up a little bit, you see that now that's getting closer and closer to the brightness of my shot. And already we're really quite close on that. So let's maybe try to get the red a little bit closer. So I'm going to turn the green gamma back down, just going a little bit more into the red. And there, I mean, we are very, very close. If I could come back here to about 100%, it's looking actually really, really good. So one way that we could ensure that that was going to match was to just maybe fix this feather a little bit. So if I select it, maybe we would want to change that mask feather tool and vary it a little bit. So I'll just make a couple of points. Maybe have one more right there, and then we can just grab it and kind of pull that out so that the feather is a little more gradual, and that's really going to help it overall. And then you won't have to color correct maybe quite so much. So now the feather's more gradual, and I want to play around with this a little bit more. See if we can't get it really perfect. So color correction and the masking working together really makes a difference on the overall integration. So maybe kind of varying this so that it's not such a perfectly straight line will also help to make a difference. There, I think that looks a lot better than just having that straight little line. And that could, this light area here could be some dust. And I think overall that works much, much better. So now let's move on to our next piece. Again, I'll drop my individual controls here. And this one isn't quite so bad because we don't have so much stuff here on the ground. So this one I might be able to get away with just turning up the red and turning down the brightness a little bit, just right in there. This one still looks like actually it might have a little more blue in it. That's why it looks almost maybe a little brighter still, even though we have the brightness turned down. So we can go into the blue and turn the blue gamma down a little bit. You'll see that that kind of starts to push it into the more yellow, a little bit more green look. Okay, so if you also still feel like it's a little too green, you can go into the green gamma and turn it down a little bit as well. So now it's really pushing the red a little bit harder, just like this piece was. So now that's going to look more red, and I think overall that looks a lot better. Now once we get this really starting to look like it's kind of blurry because this is farther in the background, you won't even be able to notice this little edge here, so don't worry too much about that. Now let's move on to our next piece. So we've got our explosion here. We're not going to worry about color correcting that since that's the fire. The ship, good color on that. I'm not worried about that. Our sinkhole, we probably could because we are seeing this area of it here. So let's go and grab our levels, drop that on. This one's really close because it's a little bit less red over here. So I'll come in here and we'll turn the red up just a hint, just kind of right in there, and maybe turn down the brightness just a bit, just like that. Okay, really close. That looks great. Now we've got our Rebel 2. This one, I'm not going to even worry about color correcting because it's so far in the background, it's going to be really blurry. And honestly, the edge that it creates here, I don't think I have a problem with its integration because it's just kind of a big piece that just hit the ground. So we'll skip that one. Then let's see, we've got our Rebel 1 JPEG right here. So this one definitely needs some work. We'll drop our levels on that. And let's go to work. We'll just come down here to the red. Let's turn up our red gamma a bit. That actually was applied to our crashed fire, so I'm going to undo that. We want to make sure that we get that on the right layer. So if you were dropping on here, you see that layer wasn't locked, so I'll just bring it down and drop it on in the layers panel so it's not accidentally dropped onto a composition that we pre-comped. Okay, just moving on, we'll come down there to the red. We'll turn up that red gamma. It's right in there. That looks a lot better. And I think we could also maybe feather the bottom of this mask just a bit, not too much. So let's go ahead and lock these 3 layers because those are becoming really easy to select. And we'll grab our Rebel, come up here, grab your mask feather tool, and let's just add a few points in and around this area. Okay? And I'll just grab this. You don't actually have to grab your selection tool. You can actually just use the mask feather tool. But I like grabbing the selection tool because then it allows me to just kind of quickly select something else if I need to. And then I'll just put another point over here and here to kind of snap that back into place. And now we've got just a slightly more feathered edge on that piece. Now if you liked the hard edge, if you felt like it looked more integrated, you don't have to feather that. Absolutely, I could have left it hard and I think it still would have worked really well. So if you feel like it's not really working for you, we could come back in there, select the edge of the mask, maybe take it back just a little bit so it is a little bit more hard and it's less of a feather. Just kind of right in there. Okay, so I mean the whole point of the color correction is to have better integration, and I think already that is looking a lot more integrated, but it is still a little bit bright. So let's select it and come into our brightness and turn it down a bit here. Now, one of the awesome things about this is that this has the exact same color as the one that's right behind it because we duplicated it. So what we can do is simply select the layer that we already changed all of our parameters on, select the effect up here in the effects and controls, and hit Control C to copy it. Then we'll come over here and grab this piece of rubble, which is right behind it, and with it selected, we'll just hit Control V, and it's going to paste that level's effect, and it'll be color corrected, and you won't have to worry about trying to get those to match or having to look back and forth between the settings. It's already done for you. Now, I said I wasn't going to color correct this one, but I think we actually could turn down the brightness a bit. So let's just drop that on there, and we won't worry about the color, but just make it a little bit darker. There we go. I think that looks like it matches quite a bit better. And this one, I think, could still maybe even be just a bit darker there. Okay, much better. All right, so now that we have these pieces color corrected, we are really starting to move into some very nicely integrated territory. I'm really happy with the way that this is looking. So there's a few other things that we can do to help our integration. And just because we've color corrected and kind of fixed the depth and the parallax is working so nicely, that doesn't mean we've done everything. And there's one very specific thing I want to add that's really going to help this out, which is a reflection. So a lot of times, when you have fire next to a car like this, it's probably going to show up in the car's shiny paint. So let's come back in the next lesson and I'll show you how to create a reflection with this piece of fire to really help add to the integration details of our shot. In this lesson, we're going to be adding reflections to the side of our car. Okay, so in the last lesson, we noticed that this little piece of fire right here behind this rubble would look a lot more realistic if it was being reflected in the glossy paint on the side of the white car. So let's start the process of creating a reflection by duplicating the fire and flipping it. So we'll come up here and just right there, crash fire 2 is the layer that's creating this piece of fire. So we'll select that and hit Control D to duplicate it. And then I'll just kind of move it over here to the side so you can see how it looks. And even if you used it like this, it would still actually look pretty good. But if you want to have a slightly more true-to-life reflection, you'll want to flip this so that it looks like a mirror image. So what we want to do is come in here and look at the scale for that crash fire 3 we've just created. And we'll need to come over here and unlink the constrained proportions so that we can put a negative sign in front of that 52.5 scale on the X value. And then we can just move this back over here. And perfect. That looks great. So now let's kind of come up here to the top, maybe kind of squish it down a little bit, maybe have it not be quite so tall, and bring it in so it's not so wide as well. Okay, so it looks like the plane of the car down here at the bottom is a slightly more diagonal line than the fire, so let's just rotate it a little bit, just like that, just grabbing that rotation tool. I'll grab my selection tool and we'll just kind of pull it down a little bit lower than the car. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. Now what we need to do is mask the fire following the outline of the car so that whenever the car moves, because the camera moves, we'll be able to create a rotoscope for that and kind of animate that along with it. But first, let's go ahead and just draw our mask. So I'm going to come up here and we'll grab our pen tool. And we want to make sure we have that crash fire selected. And I'm going to turn down the opacity of the fire a little bit just so I can see the white outline of the car and I know where I'm drawing my mask. Okay, so I'm going to come in here and we will just draw a point there at the top. Kind of pull out some of those Bezier handles. This one came out a little too far, so we can come in and just adjust that and continue drawing around the back of the car on the bumper. And then I'm going to hold down Alt and reposition that anchor handle just so that we can get a little bit more of a straight line there. And if you ever draw an anchor point and you're not happy with its position, instead of undoing it, you can actually hit the space bar and then move that if you still have your left mouse held down from when you drew it and you were pulling out those Bezier handles. So that might speed up your workflow a little bit just by getting used to using that keyboard shortcut. Okay, so now let's come in here and just finish up this mask. Let's zoom out a little bit and we'll just kind of do one long line along this tree. And I'll hold Alt to bring that handle back down. Now let's come in here and clean this up a little bit. I'm going to grab my selection tool and we'll just grab that handle and kind of make this wheel fit in that spot a little bit better with our mask. Okay, so this is looking pretty good. Now let's turn back up the opacity on our fire all the way. And you'll notice that the fire, because we added a mask, lost its collapse transformations inherited blending mode. So let's just come back up to our blending mode on this layer and change that to add as it was set on the inside of the pre-comp. Okay, so now that's looking pretty good. It's a little bit bright. We'll probably edit the brightness later on, but you'll notice that if I scrub coming down through here, the fire then is not really in the right place anymore. It kind of has overlapped the tree and the railing. So what we need to do is set some keyframes on that mask that we created. And when you begin setting keyframes on a mask, it becomes what you call a rotoscope. So a moving mask is a rotoscope, and it's what you use to kind of cover things up over time that are moving in a way that you can't really control with tracking. So let's come back in our next lesson and we'll add the keyframes to our mask to create that rotoscope. And then we may even have to create another mask for this area here on the railing. So stick around and we'll begin rotoscoping in the next lesson.